Hi, everyone. So welcome back to the History Buff and the History Buff series on the Tudors. The Tudors, a real Game of Thrones. Again, with me, Artie, your resident history buff, and recurring history buff, Anna.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
We're actually back for the 6th episode of this series. And this is actually going to be the last episode for a while. I'm going to go on a much needed break because I have been doing a lot of episodes basically since I got back from traveling. And so I'm ready for a bit of a break, but also because I am about to start a History Masters. That is going to require a little bit of my attention. Basically, in this episode, we're going to discuss the last 3 wives of Henry VIII. So that is Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. So maybe without further ado, should we get into it? Or do you have anything you want to say beforehand?
So I think the last 3 wives of Henry VIII, it was a different focus. Definitely more on the, looking to see what political gain could be gained, which is different from the first 3 wives.
I don't think there was as much passion involved.
No, I mean, especially as when we got to the 4th, so Anne of Cleves, it's the first time Henry hadn't seen or met his bride before getting married. And I think this is an anomaly in this one, and maybe the wedding of his marriage to Catherine Parr is a bit of an anomaly because you see the focus or his motivation changing.
Yeah.
It's a political marriage. With Anne of Cleves, they're very much under international threat, which we'll get into later. With Catherine Parr, the new focus is on setting up his dynasty or the next steps for when he is gone. So his focus is who can look after my son, who can maintain my legacy, who's in the best position to, create or maintain what I see as the future for the Tudor crown.
Yeah, and it's important to also mention here that by this point Henry is becoming he's not becoming at the start of this when we're going to be talking about, he's not that old, although I guess maybe in Tudor times it was old. So I guess before we get started, obviously Henry's later years, let's call that his later years, were marked by increasing instability, both physically and politically. And his reign, as you mentioned, became characterized by sort of personal ambition, political maneuvering, and obsessions with securing the dynasty for his son, Edward. Towards the end of his marriage with Anne Boleyn, he injured himself in a jousting accident, and that definitely had quite an effect on him. And then, of course, after the death of his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour, which really devastated him, Henry's health deteriorated, and that is when he really started gaining quite a lot of weight.
Yeah, and that's kind of the image we associate with Henry VIII, this huge man, this kind of tyrant. He suffered very bad gout, said he had syphilis. I mean, he was in really poor shape and very unattractive. Yeah, I think it's fair to say.
And it's a shame because ambassadors always used to comment on how beautiful he was when he was younger. And it's just a shame to see how, far that deteriorated as he got older. He, became, as you said, quite tyrannical. And also another health problem he had is that when he had his jousting accident, it buggered up his leg and it was ulcered, and which kind of flared up here and there for the rest of his life, and was a source of real discomfort. And he had to lock himself away because he was so kind of ashamed of what it did to his image as a king.
It also made him so angry. Very
his temper was
I would not have liked to have been at court.
I would not have liked to have been that either. But I guess his marriage in this period reflects his quest for stability and, securing it for his male heir, but also his declining emotional and physical state.
Yeah. And also, so if we think about domestic changes, obviously after the break with Rome, I think it was in 1938, where...
19, you mean 15?
Sorry.
Yeah, I know, but I also saw that I did this in the last episode. I did this and I didn't... I said 1935 or something, and neither of us noticed, and it's out there.
Yeah. Well, 400 years prior to 1938. Yeah. So in 1538, Henry was officially excommunicated, and Pope actually, put out kind of I wouldn't say a warrant for his arrest, but it actually encouraged Catholic countries to invade and kind of said that war against England is very honourable at this point.
Especially after the dissolution of the monasteries.
Well, yeah, in that whole period, Henry starts from 1538 dissolving the larger monasteries as well. You had various acts still to follow. The 39, there was the second act for the dissolution. Which
was completed in 1541, I believe. And
sure.
And so obviously it's filled his coffers, but it's made a lot of enemies in the Catholic states.
Yeah, so he's if we set the international scene of the late 1530s, you have, the undoing of essentially 1,000 years of Catholicism in England.
Went against basically the established order.
Yeah.
That's what's crazy about it.
It's pretty crazy. And it made Henry obviously vastly unpopular on a European level. Now, the problem we also had is typically, I think Henry was kind of saved by the fact that France and Spain were constantly at war with each other.
Yeah.
And they were natural enemies. The problem is in 1539, they actually vowed to make peace and declared that they are no longer foes and their foes are their foes, which kind of translates to your enemy is my enemy. The enemy of my friend is my enemy. Yeah, the enemy of my friend is my enemy. So you then had two hugely powerful Catholic nations, empires, turn against, unite.
So he got no friends. He got no friends.
He got no
friends.
Billy no mates.
Exactly. Henry no mates in the corner.
Henry no mates.
But yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, a very good setting of the scene and then also you had all this context because obviously not in Spain's good books because previous wives, when we did the first three wives, so Catherine of Aragon, so she was divorced after failing to provide a male heir, which obviously then led to the break with Rome. But by the way, her marriage to Henry was by far the longest, by far, 24 years. Then Anne Boleyn, which lasted for 3 years, and she was executed on charges of adultery, incest, and treason, which were, historians largely agree, falsified charges. And, her downfall really demonstrated the dangers of falling out of favor. And I think really kind of actually the later wives really kind of traumatized them and made them realize what Henry could be capable of. And then you had the third one, Jane Seymour, who did provide Henry with his much desired male heir, but then died just after giving birth. So that obviously then, as I said, really deeply affected Henry. So now on to the last three wives. So we have Anne of Cleves, the fourth. So Anne of Cleves was a German noblewoman whose marriage to Henry VIII was arranged for political reasons. However, Henry eventually didn't like her, let's say, found her unattractive.
I think eventually is pushing it. He gave it about a day.
Pretty much. The marriage was annulled after just 6 months. That was a bit of a fail. So then Catherine Howard, who was the fifth wife, she was very young and vivacious. She and Henry married in 1540, but she was, let's just say, a little too young and foolish. And she was executed for adultery in 1542 after being accused of having affairs during their marriage. But we'll get into that. The sixth wife, Catherine Parr, a twice widowed noblewoman who married Henry in 1543, and she was the one who survived.
As mentioned before, you had, I think Henry maybe got away with, there wasn't much focus on Henry because at this time you had in the Holy Roman Empire also a lot of unrest, obviously with the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, the different states were not unified. But I think one of the problems was in April 1539, you had the Treaty of Frankfurt, which was actually signed by Charles V, the Holy Roman Empire, on behalf of the empire's Roman Catholic states and the Lutheran theologian Philip Melanchthon on behalf of the Schmalkaldic League. So you had the Holy Roman Empire is now on a 15-month truce. So Charles V can look elsewhere. Also, peace is made between Charles V and Francis I of France, which means as part of that, Francis I would no longer sign any kind of alliance with England. You also had France renew its old alliance with Scotland.
They are old, spelt AULD.
Exactly. So they are natural kind of allies against England. So England at this point is very isolated.
Yeah, Billy no mates.
Billy no mates. It's a very stressful situation for Henry to be in.
Yes.
He's vastly unpopular. They do have money coming in, so he has something to offer. And he begins to look for a political match. At this point, he also does want a second son. So this is kind of on the back burner, the spare. And it takes him to the lowlands. To
German principalities. So it's important to remember that obviously back then, Germany as it exists today as a unified German-speaking nation did not exist. It was different, independent German-speaking states and principalities. And so, this leads him to the Dukedom of Cleves.
Yeah.
This is actually another state, tiny, pretty insignificant state, but one which crucially had also broken with Rome.
Yeah. So this is the thing. So Henry kind of hoped to strengthen his position by allying himself with other countries that also challenged the Pope's authority. The great task of being a royal matchmaker is obviously falls down to Thomas Cromwell, the chief minister who eventually sets his sight upon Anne of Cleves. And actually at the time there was also the option of her sister as well, who I think was Amelia.
Yeah, Amelia. Yeah, that's right. And also, by the way, it's important to remember, in English we say Anne, but in German it would be pronounced Anna.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you. Yeah, exactly. Except you are also Anna in English.
Anna
Berlin.
I should be Anna von Berlin.
Yes, you should. Yeah.
Not to be confused with Anne Boleyn.
Yeah.
It was definitely, so Anne's brother-in-law led a united German Protestant form, or like a league, to bring the German Protestant states together. So you had a country with similar religious and political outlooks as England at the time, which made complete sense for them to come together. And Hans Holbein, who is a very famous painter at the time, who does all the royal portraits.
Yeah, and who did the really famous one of Henry pushing out his chest and with the bulging codpiece.
The iconic one.
The iconic one, yeah. He also did some other ones as well, but...
Did quite a lot. He did the one of... every single royal at that point was painted by Hans Holbein. He was actually resident painter in the English court. And
the royal painter.
The royal painter. And Henry didn't want to rely on just his
ambassadors. I think also at this point he was really ill and he couldn't go himself to Cleves. And you're right, he didn't trust his ambassadors, so commissioned Thomas Cromwell commissioned Hans Holbein to go and paint a picture of the daughter of the Duke of Cleves for Henry. Now, Anne was born in 1515 and she was daughter of the then Duke of Cleves, John III. Now, it's important to say her father was actually a modest reformer, but her mother was actually a strict Catholic. So it actually shows that she grew up in a very religiously tolerant household, which I think was probably very unusual for the time. Obviously, Henry's interest is, as you say, because it was for political purposes, intended to forge an alliance with the German Protestant states and against the Catholic powers.
It definitely would have worked. It did make complete sense.
Yeah.
So Holbein's actually sent to paint an image of Anne and also Amelia's portraits. And this is because
her sister.
So Anne is 23 years old and she's actually been engaged to the Duke of Lorraine since she was like 11. Nothing came of this match, and her family assured, because Anne is engaged at the time to the Duke of Lorraine. She has been for about 12 years. Holbein also paints a picture of Amelia, who's brought into the negotiations. But they settle on Anne, and Henry actually looked at both portraits and decided and picked Anne. And if you want to go and see it, the portrait is at the Louvre.
Oh, okay.
We'll do a little filter.
The original?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
And
we should do that.
She was, I think in the portrait, she was dressed at the time in the very popular fashions of Cleves, and very rich red and gold fabrics, and this ornate headdress and fine jewels and everything. Some historians actually say there was so much emphasis on what she was wearing that it kind of overshadowed how she looked.
Yes, because she's wearing that very, lots of kind of goldy kind of, and it's all quite...
it's hard to look bad in that outfit.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. She was serving the hunter diva real nice.
She looks... So she looks like... I mean, she looks very regal. And kind of radiating power. And she was, if you think of all of Henry's wives, Catherine of Aragon and Anne of Cleves are the ones who actually come from a noble household, who are actually, you know...
The rest were all like social climbers.
Exactly. So from that perspective, she is, she also from a background is very up to the challenge of being a queen. So she is regal, she has royal blood, and Anne comes to England because Henry selects her. Yeah. And she is, I think, pretty apprehensive because
she also doesn't speak English. She doesn't speak English.
And she's the fourth wife. And I mean, I would be terrified going into that if you think of the history.
Because it was probably quite well known what happened to Anne Boleyn and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So if I got divorced, beheaded, died, and she's like,
oh my God, am I going to be another beheaded? But no, so she comes over to England. She doesn't speak English. She doesn't speak any other common language with Henry, doesn't speak French, doesn't speak Latin, so she only actually really speaks German. When she arrives in England, she travels on a Roman road to somewhere called Sittingbourne on the 30th of December 1539, and then to Rochester the following day, so on the 31st. So she was then expected to meet her future husband, the king, and at Greenwich. The thing is, Henry, I think he thought, I'm going to, surprise her. I'm going to kind of show her what, the English court is like.
Are you going to refer to the game they play at the
when he flounces in, he flounces in a disguise. Yeah. So
apparently it was quite a traditional thing to do.
No, it is. Because in England, it was believed that your true love, even if you were in a disguise,
they would recognize you.
That your true love would recognize you. Isn't that like something out of a fairy tale?
Yeah, yes. I mean, it's like such a weird test.
Yes.
Like, let me just disguise myself, and they will sense that it's me.
I know this poor German noblewoman who obviously has no idea, who doesn't speak English.
Shouldn't even be able to say.
Yeah, who has no idea about English traditions, and so Henry entered Anne's chamber with 5 companions, completely disguised, embraced her and brazenly kissed her, giving her also a New Year's gift. So this on New Year's Eve. Now, Anne, at this point, is just standing at the window and watching a bear fight in the courtyard. She was really shocked, and she just kind of was very cool and obviously didn't recognize him.
I mean, one account even says that she pushed him away.
Yeah.
There's like a few accounts. One's like, she ignored him, she pushed him away, she was shocked, she was frozen, she turned back to the bear fight.
I mean, I think it's, and I think it's because she thought it was like some commoner just coming in and being like annoying. Member of so she was obviously a bit like, kind of like, ugh, and like, oh, get off me, you commoner. Henry was obviously absolutely humiliated by this.
The biggest insult ever.
Yeah, so he leaves. And then he decides to be like, right, I'm going to show that bitch. So he changes into a robe of, out of the disguise and into a robe of purple, so royal purple, goes back, and Anne is obviously really embarrassed, apologizes, and they dine that evening. Henry is reported to have been very disappointed with her looks. But also because I think, to be honest, the fact that she humiliated him probably had a big part to do with that.
I mean, we know he has a massive ego.
A massive ego. So, he was very disappointed by her looks and saying that she looked nothing like her portrait, and that and called her the Flanders mare. Yeah, I mean, I think they did share a bed, but Henry never consummated the marriage. And poor Anne, I think she had no idea what sex was.
I don't think she knew what was going on, to be honest. I mean,
she did or she didn't?
She didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, this is happening.
Because Henry would get into bed with her, kiss her hand and be like, good night, darling, and then just turn away. And she was like, oh, okay, that was sex.
What?
Yes, apparently I've read accounts saying that. Yes. And so she was like, oh, wow. And then apparently it was only when she was talking to her ladies in waiting that her ladies in waiting were just thinking, oh my God, poor thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Poor thing. Actually, poor thing.
Yeah, literally. But so after their first meeting, Henry doesn't want to marry her. That he hoped that they could use the fact that she'd been engaged to the Duke of Lorraine as an excuse to prevent the match.
To annul it.
No, just not to not go through it. But Anne's advisors and the Cleves household insisted that she was free to marry. And obviously they did not want to lose the political alliance. They were in too deep at this point. Henry had no choice but to go through with the marriage.
Yes.
And
he goes through with it.
He goes through that, and on the 6th of January, they are married at Greenwich Palace. And her wedding ring was inscribed with her personal motto, which translates to "God send me and keep me well," which I think is quite accurate to probably how she was feeling on the crossing table.
Yeah, I know. I know. And I do feel sorry for her, because I think she realized that Henry was not into her. And so she tried to make herself attractive to him. And obviously this didn't work. And so they marry. And Henry is furious with his chief minister, Cromwell, because he was the one who arranged the match. And so he blames it all on Cromwell. Honestly, as soon as they were married, Henry started looking for an annulment.
Yeah.
So started trying to get an annulment, because by February, he's also started courting a young woman called Catherine Howard. We're going to come on to her. This search for an annulment is actually ultimately what brings down Thomas Cromwell.
Yeah. I mean, Henry apparently said to Cromwell, so obviously after the wedding night, he apparently told Cromwell that I liked her before, not well, and now I like her much worse. And so, yeah, they never consummated the marriage. And Cromwell now has a new mission, and that is to annul the marriage, which is definitely an easier feat, given it wasn't consummated very clearly.
And also now that Henry is the supreme head of the English church.
Well, exactly. He can do what he wants, but also an annulment is also different from a divorce.
Oh, yes. So it's as if it didn't exist.
It says, it declares that a marriage was never valid.
Valid, yes.
Or binding.
Right.
So from that point on, actually, this is the interesting part. She had a really good life. After the marriage was annulled, apparently, and I mean, there's a lot of letters to and from Henry and Anne, she became known as his dear sister.
Yes.
And they actually became really good friends.
Yeah.
So Anne of Cleves, I think, got away with
pretty lightly.
Yeah, she did really well out of this, because she then gets a really good settlement.
She goes to live at Richmond Palace.
And she was obviously very calm about the whole annulment, I think.
Which, by the way, was the marriage was annulled after just 6 months in July 1540 on the grounds of non-consummation, and because of Anne's pre-contract. That's what they used as a reason to annul.
I mean, Carl, it's quite good, because Carl Horst was a diplomat, and he, obviously for Anne, it turned out really well, because I think she was absolutely terrified for her position and for her life when she realised something's wrong here.
She thought she was headed for the chopping block.
I mean, you would, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But it then turned out that Anne stayed very calm, which is actually the opposite of what Catherine of Aragon did. She kicked up this huge fuss. I mean, rightly so. Catherine of Aragon, 20 years, you know.
You're so right.
But
she dealt with him in the right way.
She stayed calm. She kept her very private thoughts to herself. She accepted the annulment without a fight.
Yes.
Which means she could take a step back, and it was
the right way to deal with Henry.
The right way to deal with Henry. Just step out and don't risk your life.
Yes.
Trying to
don't
cling
fight
on to the queenship.
Yes. Despite the annulment, Anne was treated with respect, given that, as you said, the title, the King's beloved sister, and received a very generous settlement from Henry. She was actually given the choice to go back to Cleves, but she decided not to, because she got given quite a lot of land in England, and she decided she kind of liked England, and by this point she had learned English, and had a very comfortable life, and she outlived Henry and remained on very good terms with his children as well.
Yeah. The peace between France and Spain, it didn't last very long, which definitely helped, because it took the pressure off. I mean, it took some of the fear away of immediate invasion and a religious war backed by pretty much the whole of Europe.
Oh, okay. So it took the pressure off Henry to keep the marriage.
Because he wasn't as desperate for international backup, so to speak.
Right.
The king was so grateful to Anne's cooperation, and he so desperately wanted to obviously avoid conflict with her family as well, that he presented his former queen with a generous settlement. He granted her actually the official title, the king's sister. Like you mentioned, she got vast amounts of land. including Richmond Palace and later Anne Boleyn's Hever Castle.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
which is kind of, if I was Anne, I would so not, the ghost of the other Anne is like,
I know. She really did well there.
She did really well. I think she got an annual income of £500, which was just insane at that time.
Insane at that time, yeah.
And Anne accepted with Henry's encouragement. She then wrote to her family saying, don't worry, this has turned out for the best. Yeah. I'm good.
Yeah, she would then outlive Henry and died on the 16th of July, 1557. Historians think from cancer. And obviously at that point, Mary I, Henry's eldest daughter, was on the throne, and she actually gave her a monarch's burial at Westminster Abbey. So that actually showed how much her children liked her. And
also, she did amazing to get through unscathed the downfall of Cromwell, because Cromwell was executed the same day that Henry VIII married Catherine Howard,
which was on
the 28th July 1540. So to come through that completely unscathed, surviving that crisis, that's
Cromwell basically took it.
She's smarter than. Did it have a big impact? What do you think
about whether
the impact of? I mean, Anne of Cleves on Henry VIII, I think it added to his, again, you see in the latter half of all his last wives, an increase in paranoia, in insecurity. Yeah. I think that's what it did. And he then tried to counteract that with remaining very close to Anne.
Yes. And I think that was because he, by this point, had maybe felt that he had been... He suddenly felt his scruples, and he quite liked keeping one of them close. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that Anne was just so accommodating of his wishes. Yeah. I think that had a lot to do with it. I think had she kicked up a fuss, she probably would have gone to the chopping block.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately, she smashed it, and she, outlived him and lived a very comfortable life. So, I think she was definitely one of the queens who, did the best out of Henry VIII. Now, on to the fifth wife. So, Catherine Howard. Now, as I said, they started courting in February 1541, so just a month after Henry married Anne of Cleves. And
she is the first cousin of Anne Boleyn, obviously the scandalous second wife of Henry VIII. And
born in 1524.
She's also second cousin to his third wife, Jane Seymour. She comes from the powerful Howard family, albeit a kind of junior branch with little fortune.
Yes.
Her father, Edmund Howard, was actually
a big gambler.
He was a big gambler, and I can't remember the position he had at court, but interestingly, there's an account of him telling Wolsey, he actually went into hiding because he had so much debt, and he told Wolsey that he can't leave his hiding because he will be, arrested as soon as he leaves. But then his job in court was finances.
Oh,
so it was a little bit controversial.
So Catherine was born in 1524, and the daughter of Edmund Howard and Joyce Culpeper. So cousin to Anne Boleyn, and she was young, beautiful, and vivacious.
So she actually had quite a sad upbringing. So she actually grew up with her grand stepmother, the Dowager Countess of Norfolk, who actually took in quite a few young women. And she was said to have shared, a dormitory with several others. She was probably the most noble within this dormitory. And there was definitely a lot of, although she had a good education, living in these kind of conditions in this dormitory, it bred a form of rebellion. She might have been as young as 12 when she actually started having her first kind of sexual encounters. Now, she was pretty promiscuous. Having said that, there are accounts, was it sexual abuse? I don't think it was sexual abuse, but just because something's not abusive doesn't mean it isn't highly inappropriate. So she had relations with Henry Manox. She had relations with Francis Derham. And Francis Derham particularly was, played a part later in her downfall, caused massive problems for her the whole way through her life. there was no doubt that, you know, she had full-blown sexual relations with both of them, but obviously she was very young. She wasn't a dormitory of all girls. There was very much there was like a new era of silliness in those young women. So she didn't have this kind of strict upbringing because she was never, I mean, maybe she lost her mother very young. Her father, you know, the Dowager Duchess definitely failed to guard Catherine's honour. Let's put it like that.
And so, you know, she is quite promiscuous from a young age. And, you know, she goes to court. And as I said, she was young, beautiful, and a vivacious courtier. Caught Henry's eye. They basically, start courting February 1541. The reason why Henry becomes quite infatuated with her, spoils her rotten, gives her loads of gifts, is because he believes that Catherine's youth revitalized him. And she was very young. She was 17 at this point.
Yeah.
So, I think he was very... Because by this point, Henry was, you know, getting older.
He was 30 years older than her.
Yeah, exactly. And so he, you know, felt that her youth really revitalized him. And I think he liked being around it. Yeah. And
she had an appealing personality at times.
Yeah, she was very accommodating.
Quite, well, I mean, it was quite different to how she ran her household. But she was also, I mean, very inexperienced. She was actually quite junior in Anne of Cleves' household. And then suddenly she's the head of the household. So she was, I mean, different accounts, she was said to be obnoxious, quite angry. She's very dismissive. She has like she rules her household with kind of fear. Huh. But what she does well is she's good at delegating tasks, because obviously she has no idea of, so the queen at that time is head of her household and, you know, really should have an overview of, you know, where the money from the land is coming from. She delegates this to all kind of gentlemen within the court who are used to have been doing this for like four queens up until now. So she doesn't try and get involved in that, which I suppose is quite a good thing. She can be very unkind to her servants and very dismissive. She did have an appealing personality for Henry. She loved to dance. She loved music. She seems to have been popular with members of the Dowager Duchess's household, and she does bring Henry VIII in, for sure. She knows what she's doing. Yeah. Because she is sexually experienced.
Yeah, because the narrative is that she was a stupid young girl, and I think she did actually have some, you know, she
much as you can at 18, when you've just grown up in like a posh orphanage.
Yes, exactly. So had quite a closed off childhood. Yeah, Catherine, you know, held influence at court and favoured by Henry, who saw her also as a symbol of his virility. You know, him saying, "Oh, look, I can still get this, you know, young bride at this age." Yeah, such a flex. However, accusations of infidelity surfaced in 1541, leading to a scandal which shocked the court. And this is because you had some people who, because it's important to remember at that time that the court was split between religious conservatives who wanted to go back to the old ways of, you know, Roman Catholicism, and then reformists. It was people who were trying to get their faction in power. And so these accusations surfaced, and Catherine was actually arrested. And it's reported, apparently, that when she was arrested on these charges, Henry was walking by in the gallery in Hampton Court Palace. Henry was walking by, and she was being arrested by captors, and she managed to break free of them, and she ran screaming after Henry, but begging for mercy. And that's actually where this, I think it's a myth, ghost of her at Hampton Court is meant to exist today. Apparently, her running screaming down the gallery, begging Henry for mercy.
She'd also fallen in love with Thomas Culpeper at the time, who was a very distant cousin of hers, who was a member of the Privy Chamber.
But do you know why? It's because Henry had shut himself away a lot because of his leg.
Yep.
He didn't want his young wife to see him like this, so he shut himself away, refused to see her. And so you can kind of understand why her eye started to wander. You know, she was this young woman at the height of her, you know, virility, you can sort of understand why she wanted some company, some male company.
I mean, of course, I think it was also the job was, I mean, it's a big job being queen and dealing with horrible Henry, who's really ugly at this point and, you know, in a lot of pain and, you know, tyrannical and quite sporadic as well. I think he was also so mortified by, I mean, she embarrassed him being young and then cheating on him is a huge embarrassment to a king, and especially to someone who is now, you know, got ulcers all up and down his legs and is kind of oozing a bit.
Yeah, so basically really offends his honour, his ego, which you don't want to do to Henry VIII, as I hope you have learnt from what we've talked about.
On the scaffold, she said, "I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Thomas Culpeper."
Oh, scandalo.
So she like openly admitted it. And also it didn't help that, you know, there were always rumours circulating because obviously her affair with, like quite early on with Francis Derham, they actually referred to each other as husband and wife. And then it was Catherine who called it off because it was kind of going way too fast. And he then left to go to Ireland, but then kept coming back and wanted to work in her household. And he was a constant kind of circling threat. So I think it would have definitely come out at some point. Interestingly, Catherine Howard as a queen, she appeared pretty gracious. She was an interesting stepmother. She didn't get along very well with Mary I, I think partly because she was older. Sorry, Mary I was older than her.
Yes.
So to have a younger stepmother is a bit weird.
I know.
Even in those days. Her relationship with Elizabeth was better, I think because they were family. And obviously I know she gifted jewels to Elizabeth, but also she had quite a good relationship with Edward. So I think from that, I mean, you could see from the stepmother perspective. Yeah, she kind of won favour with the next king. Yeah, Mary, very difficult, obviously.
Yeah. No, but I think
weird.
I would also find that a bit weird. Yeah, but she was executed on the 13th of February 1542 alongside several of her alleged lovers, and she was just 19, and which is pretty crazy, to be honest. This time Henry did not give her the kind of one last favour of having her executed with a sword. She was executed with an axe, and it's reported that the night before her execution, she asked for the block to be brought to her so she could practice laying her head on the block with grace. Yeah. So,
I mean, arguably in this case, this is justified, and Boleyn, obviously, there was no hot evidence, but apparently Catherine had this affair with Thomas Culpeper, and even when Catherine went on, you know, journeys around England with Henry VIII, they actually brought Thomas Culpeper with him because he was a gentleman of the King's Privy Chamber.
Oh, really?
So, you know, she's on tour with Henry.
Yeah.
Shagging Culpeper.
Yeah, I know. Crazy.
So, you know, there was, you know, very big. There was evidence against her. There was a letter Culpeper wrote.
And also, I think one of her ladies in waiting also spilled the tea.
Yeah.
So, anyway, all ended tragically for poor old Catherine. Well, poor young Catherine. Her betrayal of Henry, it kind of reinforced his view of women as treacherous and untrustworthy.
I mean, it completely led to his paranoia.
Yeah.
But
he became more repressive and tried to exert more control over his court and was less tolerant of dissent and stuff.
From a wider perspective, the news of Catherine's affair was brought to Henry VIII by Cranmer. And Cranmer was the Archbishop of the time, but he was definitely pushing constantly to further distance from the old ways of Catholicism, because obviously Henry maintained that Henry was a Catholic in belief, and Henry definitely wanted to put a bit of a stop to the changes happening on the ground at that point. You know, whether it was the interior of churches, Cranmer believed in a very simple form of worship from, you know, English Bibles, and, you know, stripping the churches from all of the gold and having candles, even something as simple as having a candle in a church. And you did have these two factions of court, like you said, Artie, and Cranmer used the task of breaking the news to Henry to completely slash the conservative faction.
Exactly.
And this obviously gave more power to the reformists. But yeah.
And and that sets the stage perfectly for the sixth and final wife. Enter Catherine Parr, the survivor. So she was born in 1512, so she's an older woman. Well, I mean, by today's standards, not that old, but back then this was an older, more mature woman. And she had actually been twice widowed already. She was very well educated, very pious woman with very strong Protestant sympathies. And she had, a background in managing households, and her experience made her a very suitable wife for Henry. And I think this is what attracted him to her. The fact that after his experience with Catherine Howard, the young, silly Catherine Howard, I think he was very much attracted to her. She was in her early 30s at this point.
I think.
This maturity and a woman who was also very intelligent. She was very intelligent. She knew how to have a conversation. And yeah, they married in July 1543. And I guess you could really say her role with Henry was companion and caretaker. That's what I would kind of label her as, because by this point Henry is getting quite old and really quite infirm.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue that Catherine Parr was up there with one of the most influential wives of Henry, partly because, she did influence the Third Succession Act, which restored daughters Mary Elizabeth to the line of succession. She did act as regent while Henry was on a military campaign in France in 1544, because Henry, in his later years, he again, became obsessed with this idea of regaining military victory, from reestablishing his image, trying to relive the footsteps of Henry V and the Battle of Agincourt, and this taking over of France and getting he actually did team up, so to speak, with Spain, as with all of Henry's international battles. He was, for lack of a better word, snaked by Charles V, who would kind of say, yeah, let's go on this military campaign, let's do it, and then make peace with France behind Henry's back, leaving Henry,
high and
dry. But, was it a success? Henry seized Bologna. It was quite irrelevant, but it was obviously a huge PR win.
It was for his ego, really.
It was for his ego.
Everything really was for his ego, to be honest.
Exactly.
Everything he did came back to his
Stroke
ego.
the ego.
Stroke the ego, exactly.
But Catherine is doing pretty well. She became regent. She got on very well with all his children.
Yes, and she played a key role in reconciling Henry with his daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, and helping to, as you said, restore them to the line of succession. Yeah. So I think she actually she had a big play in the education of Elizabeth, and it's probably why Elizabeth became
Edward.
Protestant.
Yeah, she had a really big impact, for sure. And I mean, I think which Elizabeth movie is it with you can actually see, I mean, Elizabeth grew up in Catherine Parr's household.
Like also Jane Grey as well.
Yeah, exactly. Your fave.
My fave. The thing about Catherine, though, is that she was quite, a bit like Anne Boleyn, she was quite mouthy. She liked to argue. She liked to argue about religion. She was very, very set in her Protestant ways, as, a Protestant reformer. And, as you said, had significant influence on the religious education of Henry's children. At that point, Edward and Elizabeth, not Mary. Mary was fully grown by this point. And, she actually often argued with Henry about religious matters and actually narrowly avoided being executed after being accused of heresy.
Because obviously, again, Henry VIII was more leaning towards, the old Catholic ways.
But just not Roman Catholic.
Roman Catholic. And also, what happens then, you have the conservative faction at court, the anti-Protestant officials rising against Catherine Parr. And actually in 1547, there was a warrant for her arrest.
Yes, exactly. And you know, because it was of her sort of...
Sorry, in spring of 1546.
Yes.
But the king and her then reconciled.
Yes, and you know why? It's because of her quick wit in appeasing Henry. She knew how to appease Henry. She knew exactly which buttons to press.
Maybe because she's an experienced wife.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, no, but and also after seeing Henry go through 5 wives, I'm sure she was like, okay, right, I can't do that. Can't do that.
Yeah.
But she still did manage to get herself almost executed. So that was a close shave. So yeah, and she does ultimately survive. You know, Henry eventually dies in 1547, and she would go on to marry Thomas Seymour, but the marriage was quite troubled for reasons that we'll talk about when we talk about Elizabeth I. But she would then go on to die in childbirth in 1548, which obviously ended her life on a bit of a tragic note. But she ultimately survived the tumultuous reign of Henry VIII.
Her funeral was the first Protestant funeral to be held in English.
Really?
In England, Scotland,
wow.
Wales.
God, that's crazy. Okay, I didn't know that. And so, yeah, Henry dies in 1547. By this point, he is, you know, very old, very ill, can barely move. And so, yeah, when he dies, that ends his very dramatic, very scandalous 36-year reign, which included 6 wives. Those last 3 wives are the ones we just talked about. So let's just sort of quickly summarize them. So Anne of Cleves, diplomatic tool, ended up actually doing pretty well out of the marriage. Catherine Howard, symbol of youthful passion, which I think is, yeah.
Which the irony is his, you know, he married her, like you said, because she made him feel young.
Yes.
But yeah, that crashed and burned.
Crashed and burned.
Just like Henry's youth.
Yeah. And then Catherine Parr was really the opposite of that.
Mutton
She had a very
dressed as lamb for him.
Yeah, no, but she had a stabilizing influence, and I think
Catherine Parr is the most influential.
And they ultimately ended up having a very good respect for one another. I think she was probably the woman who Henry, actually no, maybe Catherine of Aragon was, but no, they had a good respect for each other. All of these marriages ended up having an impact on Henry and the Tudor court, and also on the Tudor dynasty as a whole. These marriages influenced the upbringing of future reigns of Henry's children, particularly in shaping the religious landscape of England. And yeah, the instability and drama of Henry's later marriages contributed to the volatile nature of the Tudor succession, ultimately illustrated the complexities of Henry VIII's character, his insecurities, his ruthlessness, and his longing for stability.
I think as well, like Henry's like sporadicness just goes to show how, you know, his mental health was also in pieces, because obviously he filled his coffers with the dissolution of the monasteries. He then blew all of this on
the war
his second war in France, which actually come his death, England is bankrupt. He has one son. Yes. Okay. That's okay. But he's married been 6 times. He's isolated himself from the rest of Europe. He has no international glory, even though, you know, Alsace-Lorraine, Boulogne, these are all kind of examples of international and military victory. Did they mean anything in the grand scheme of things? No. But you enter now a very, what's called as the mid-Tudor crisis, the next few years.
Yes.
Which we will be dissecting in later episodes.
Which I'm very much looking forward to getting into. But first, I need a break.
Okay.
Do you?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, me more, because I've been also doing other episodes, but Anna and I do have some fun things that we're going to be creating for you guys. So do keep a lookout for that. But for now, going to be taking a break from the podcast in general, but also, of course, from the Tudor series. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode.
If you have any questions,
leave them in the comments below.
Feel free to ask.
Yeah, those marriages, they were marked by political, personal, and religious drama, and they helped shape the end of his reign and the future of the Tudor dynasty, which we will carry on after a break. And so, we'll be looking forward to getting into all of that stuff. You know, Mary I, Jane Grey, Elizabeth I. And all of that, all of that stuff.
We've only just started.
Yeah,
there's still plenty of Tudors to go.
Plenty of Tudors. So, okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you soon. See you after the break. Okay, bye, everyone.